Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at a truly legendary moment in history, the fall of China's Han Dynasty, and the chaos that erupted afterwards, the famous Three Kingdoms period. It's just one of those stories, isn't it? Epic scope, huge battles, loyalty, betrayal, everything.
It really is. And the fall of a dynasty, well, it wasn't exactly new in China. You had the Shang, violently overthrown way back, then the Zhou, which ruled for ages but eventually just sort of dissolved into the warring states, period.
Right, generations of fighting. And then Qin unified everything super fast, but boom, collapsed in less than 20 years. Brutal, short-lived.
Exactly. The first emperor's methods, they just weren't sustainable. But the Han, now they were different. They managed over 400 years.
400 years, that's immense, a truly foundational empire. There was that brief hiccup, wasn't there, Wang Mang?
Yeah, Wang Mang seized power for a bit, 89 to 25, but then the Han came back for another couple of centuries. It's a huge span of time. If you're thinking about, say, Roman history, this is roughly the same time Rome goes from republic to empire, Augustus, the whole peak period.
That really puts it in perspective. And the Han became this sort of benchmark.
For later Chinese history, absolutely. It's seen as maybe the first fully recorded dynasty, really.
Yeah.
Unlike the Shang or Zhou, where there's more myth mixed in, the Han's rise, and crucially its fall, were documented in detail. So its collapse became the classic symbol, the textbook case of dynastic decay.
And that collapse, that moment when things really start to crack and then just shatter, that's our focus today. We're not trying to cover the whole Three Kingdoms saga. That's decades of incredibly complex stuff.
Way too much for one go.
Exactly. Instead, we're zooming in right on the beginning, exploring those initial moments, the seeds of chaos, let's call them. How did the mighty Han start to crumble?
And specifically, we're digging into the opening of Luo Guanzhong's novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. An incredible piece of literature.
Written much later, right?
Yeah. Centuries later, yeah. 14th century, probably. We're using the Martin Palmer translation here. And our goal, our mission for this deep dive is to see how the internal rot, the decay within the late Han court, combined with rebellion and just raw individual ambition, started pulling the empire apart, setting the stage for that huge conflict.
So what's the roadmap for today? What key things are we hitting in these early chapters?
Well, we need to understand the state of the late Han first, that crumbling foundation. Then, the massive spark.
Yeah.
The Yellow Turban Rebellion.
That sounds dramatic.
Oh, it was. And out of that chaos, we get the Oath of the Peach Garden, Liu Bei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, the Sworn Brothers.
The heroes.
The core protagonists, yeah. Then the rise of the first major villain, the tyrant Dong Zhuo. How his actions sparked a reaction, this warlord coalition forming against him.
And some big early clashes, famous moments.
Definitely, including Lu Bu's role, his famous betrayal. We'll introduce that initial cast of characters, Dong Zhuo, Lu Bu, Yuan Shao, Cao Cao, the brothers, and see what drives them early on. It's a packed start.
Sounds like it. So, let's begin with that foundation. Crumbling, you said. The novel starts right there, doesn't it? Setting the scene of decline.
It does. It immediately references those earlier dynasties falling, positioning the Han's collapse as part of this historical pattern, this classic symbol of dynastic decay.
But what did that decay actually look like on the ground at the start of the story?
The novel quickly shows us the symptoms, primarily the instability right at the center of the imperial court. The text contrasts the Han's fully recorded history with the earlier, more mythical ones, giving its fall a kind of historical weight. But the why is complex. What we see immediately is the political mess.
So even though the Han was the model for centuries, by this point it's rotting from the inside out. Why is understanding that kind of collapse, that internal decay, still relevant? Why should we care today?
Well, because it's a theme you see again and again, right? Throughout history, across different cultures, how large, powerful structures, empires, governments, even companies can just unravel from within.
Due to what? Corruption, infights.
Exactly. Corruption, factionalism, where groups care more about themselves than the whole, economic problems alienating people, losing legitimacy, all that stuff. Understanding those dynamics helps us see how power works, how stability can be lost. It shows even the biggest empires aren't invincible if the foundations are weak.
And in the novel, that's why things fall apart so fast. Because the center is already weak.
Precisely. The imperial government is so paralyzed, so ineffective, that these regional powers and rebels actually have the space to challenge it. The center just cannot hold.
And the novel throws us right into that paralysis, doesn't it? The power struggle at court. Eunuchs versus officials.
Yes, immediately. We meet Grand Administrator He Jin. He's important, related to the emperor's mother, Empress He. He and General Yuan Shao, another big name from a powerful family, are plotting to destroy the eunuchs.
Why? What was the deal with the eunuchs?
Over time, eunuchs in the inner palace had gained enormous power. They had direct access to the emperor, often bypassing the formal bureaucracy. The traditional officials, operating through official channels, hated this. They saw the eunuchs as corrupt, controlling access, hoarding wealth, undermining good government. It was a deep-seated resentment.
And we see Cao Cao getting involved in this plot, too.
Right. The text says Cao Cao joins the plot. That's significant. It shows him, even early on, aligning with powerful figures, playing the court politics game.
But it wasn't a unified front against the eunuchs.
No, even He Jin's own sister, the Empress He, was initially against the plot. Maybe she feared the violence or the power vacuum it would create. It just highlights the divisions. It wasn't a government. It was, like you said, a mess. A snake pit, really. Prime conditions for chaos or for someone ruthless to step in.
Okay, so the foundation's weak, the court's tearing itself apart, and then comes the smark. The Yellow Turban Rebellion. This sounds like the event that really blows things wide open.
It was absolutely massive, a total game changer. The source names the leader, Dong Zhuo, called himself Heaven's Commander. He proclaimed a new era.
What was it based on?
It was a popular religious movement, drawing on Taoist ideas, the way of great peace. It promised healing, salvation, a new age of equality. It really resonated with people suffering from corruption, heavy taxes, floods, famines, all the problems of a declining dynasty.
And people responded.
Massively. The source says hundreds of thousands of people respond to his call.
Hundreds of thousands. And they had the identifying feature, right? The yellow cloth.
Exactly. Wear yellow cloth wrapped around their heads. An instant visible symbol of rebellion spreading like wildfire.
Were they effective fighters?
Initially, incredibly so. The text says the imperial troops just scatter as if blown away by the wind. This wasn't just a local riot. It was a nationwide uprising that the weakened state just couldn't handle effectively.
And this forces local officials to scramble, like Governor Luoyang.
Right. He's mentioned as a distant member of the imperial family, but even he has to resort to local measures. He has to issue a written proclamation in order to recruit an army of volunteers.
So the central government can't cope. It's up to local guys to raise their own armies.
That's exactly what it shows. Power is devolving. Local leaders, official or not, have to step up, which, solves the immediate problem maybe, but it also empowers those regional figures. It lays the groundwork for the empire breaking up later.
Now, this is where the novel gets really interesting, mixing history with, well, magic. Zhang Zhu and his followers are described using supernatural powers.
Yes, Guanzhong definitely adds a layer of folklore and the fantastical here. The source mentions Zhang Bao, one of the Zhu brothers, conjuring a great raging storm, filling the air with rocks, a black cloud full of spectral horses and men, gives the rebels this aura of fearsome, otherworldly power.
So how do our heroes, Liu Bei's little volunteer group, deal with magical storms and ghost armies?
Well, this is where the novel gets creative and maybe a bit gruesome. They lure the rebels in by pretending to flee. Then, from a hillside, they ambush them with an appalling mixture of blood and entrails.
What? Blood and guts? Seriously, that's the counter magic.
Apparently, according to the novel, it works perfectly. Instantly, the storm dies away, the cloud disperses, the papermen and straw horses collapse. It's presented as this kind of visceral, maybe folk magic counter to the Taoist magic. Highly memorable, anyway.
Memorable is one word for it. Okay, so this massive rebellion, the chaos, the need for local defense forces, this is the context for our main heroes coming together. Liu Bei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei.
Exactly. Liu Bei, or Huande, is introduced as that distant member of the imperial family, giving him that sliver of legitimacy, that motivation to restore the Han. Zhang Fei is immediately shown with his famous hot temper.
Which gets him into trouble later, I bet.
Often.
Yeah.
But it also fuels his fighting spirit. And Guan Yu is there with them, his sworn brother, their volunteers, stepping up because the official armies are failing.
And they seal their bond with the Oath of the Peach Garden, one of the most famous scenes in Chinese culture. The source doesn't describe the actual oath scene here, but it refers back to it constantly, right? The vow in the peach orchard, upholding the Han.
Yes, it's fundamental to their characters, pledging brotherhood, loyalty until death, shared purpose. The source mentions them being reunited brothers once again later, like dragon and tiger combined. This bond, forged in the fire of rebellion, is their core strength. It's about finding family, really, in terrifying times.
And the novel puts them into conflict almost immediately after this oath, right? They run into Cao Cao.
That's a key narrative choice by Guanzhong. Historically, things unfolded more slowly, but the novel compresses time to bring the main players together quickly. The oath isn't just about brotherhood, it's a commitment to action, defending the Han, which inevitably puts them on a collision course with others rising to power, like Cao Cao.
Okay, so we have the empire decaying, the massive Yellow Turban Rebellion shaking everything up, and our heroes forming their legendary bond to fight the chaos. But chaos creates openings for villains, too. Enter Dong Zhuo.
Dong Zhuo. He arrives on the scene as the governor of Hedong, already a powerful figure. And the first impression, incredibly overbearing and rude.
Doesn't sound like a people person.
Not at all. The source describes Liu Bei's group meeting him, and Dong Zhuo just dismisses them, insults them. And Zhang Fei, true to form,
Explodes.
instantly, he must die, draws his sword right there. Wanda and Guan Yu barely manage to stop them from attacking this powerful governor. It immediately paints Dong Zhuo as arrogant, someone who provokes outrage. And it shows the dynamic between the brothers Zhang Fei's fury, Liu Bei, and Guan Yu's restraint.
But Dong Zhuo isn't just rude, he's smart enough to use the chaos. How does he get into a position of real power?
He exploits the situation perfectly. Remember that plot against the eunuchs? He, Jin, Yuan Shao, Cao Cao, trying to clean house in the capital?
Yeah, the internal mess.
Well, that infighting weakened the capital. Jin actually made the fatal mistake of calling in outside generals to help him deal with the eunuchs. This created the opening. Dong Zhuo, as a powerful regional governor with a big army nearby, just marches in.
So the attempt to fix one problem created an opportunity for a much bigger one.
Exactly. The power vacuum in the capital caused by the infighting is what allows Dong Zhuo to seize control. And once he's in Luoyang, the capital, he acts decisively.
This is where he replaces the emperor.
Yes. Chillingly direct. The source says in AD 189, he just overthrows the Emperor Shao and installs Shao's brother as emperor.
How does he pull that off?
Brute force and intimidation. The text describes him in the main hall with his sword in his hand, surrounded by the most powerful officials. He declares the young Emperor Shao weak and untrustworthy, and announces he's putting Shao's younger brother, Prince Si, on the throne, claiming he's saintly, virtuous, and wise. His advisor reads the proclamation. It's a complete takeover, backed by military might. The Han dynasty's authority is just shattered.
Wow, okay, so Dong Zhuo is now the tyrant pulling the strings. But surely people push back. This leads to the Warlord coalition.
Immediately. Yanzhou, who was part of that earlier anti-eunuch plot, is one of the first to openly defy him.
What does he do?
Right there in the hall, he confronts Dong Zhuo about deposing the emperor, grips his sword, ready to fight. Dong Zhuo's advisor, Li Ru, smartly lets Yuan Shao leave rather than start a bloodbath right then. But Yuan Shao makes a public statement. He piles up his official seals and documents at the palace gate, a clear sign of contempt, before heading back to his own territory.
Interesting that Dong Zhuo tries to buy him off later, making him a governor.
Yeah, Dong Zhuo tries a bit of politics, maybe trying to placate powerful figures, but it's too late. The damage is done. The opposition is forming.
The Warlord coalition against him, led by Yuan Shao.
Yuan Shao becomes the figurehead, yeah. The source poem calls him the warrior from the north. But this coalition isn't just about pure loyalty to the deposed emperor. Many are governors, generals who already raised armies to fight the Yellow Turbans. They see Dong Zhuo as a threat, an illegitimate usurper. So they band together, loosely, against this common enemy. It's the moment the empire visibly fractures into regional power blocks.
And people like Cao Cao join this coalition too, after his failed assassination attempt on Dong Zhuo.
Exactly. Cao Cao tried to take Dong Zhuo out himself, failed, fled, and then raised his own army. He becomes a key player in the coalition. And this is where we get some of those really famous early clashes.
Right. Dong Zhuo controls the capital and the key passes, like Tiger Cage Pass.
He sends a huge army, 200,000 men, to defend those strategic points. And he has formidable generals, like Xuchang.
Ah, Xuchang. This leads to that Guan Yu moment, right? With the wine still warm.
Classic scene. The coalition leaders are worried. Xuchang seems unbeatable. Guan Yu, still basically unknown, steps up. Cao Cao offers him warm wine. Guan Yu says essentially, hold that thought, I'll be right back. Rides out, kills Xuchang in single combat, comes back, and the wine is still warm.
Instantly establishes him as this incredible warrior.
Absolutely. Earns him massive respect, shows his quiet confidence and lethal skill.
We also see Sun Jian involved. from the south.
Yes, Sun Jian is fighting Dong Zhuo's forces too. He's a key figure from the Jiangdong region. The source mentions Dong Zhuo trying to buy him off later with a marriage alliance for his son, showing Dong Zhuo uses politics as well as force. Sun Jian's involvement and the later story about him finding the imperial seal highlights that these warlords had mixed motives, fighting tyranny, yes, but also looking out for their own power.
It feels like everyone who's going to matter is suddenly thrown into the spotlight here. Let's just recap the key players we've met so far, based on these early actions.
Okay. Center stage, the villain, Dong Zhuo. Overbearing, ruthless former governor who seized power, replaced the emperor, rules by fear.
Then the ultimate warrior, Lu Bu.
Introduced as unbeatable in combat, but his loyalty is flexible. We see him persuaded by Dong Zhuo's envoy to kill his first master, Ding Yuan, just for gifts and promises. He joins Dong Zhuo, sees himself as a man of great importance. His skill is legendary, greatest in the land, but that initial betrayal defines him.
And sets up his later, bigger betrayal of Dong Zhuo himself, engineered by Wang Yun using Diao Chan.
Exactly. Wang Yun's plot is brilliant, manipulative. He uses Diao Chan, this beautiful singer, to play Dong Zhuo and Lu Bu against each other. Promises her to both, lets Diao Chan fuel Lu Bu's jealousy and wounded pride. Wang Yun hammers on Lu Bu's honor. "You're a famous warrior. How can you stand this treatment?" It works perfectly. Lu Bu swears to kill Dong Zhuo.
Yuan Shao, the established general who defies Dong Zhuo, leads the coalition.
Represents the old guard initially, resisting the tyrant. But he quickly focuses on building his own power base in the north. He's a major contender in his own right.
And Cao Cao, involved early, tries the assassination, flees, raises his own army using a fake edict. Very resourceful. That story about him tricking his father as a kid really shows his cunning.
Cao Cao is maybe the most complex, seemingly loyalist, risking his life against Dong Zhuo, but immediately afterwards, he's pragmatic, ambitious, building his own power, uses claims of loyalty and integrity, but also deception. He's playing the long game from the start.
And finally, our heroes, Liu Bei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei.
Liu Bei, Tuan. The distant imperial relative starts of no significance, but fate decreed otherwise. Presented as the leader, principled, wants to restore the Han, fights the rebels, shows restraint sometimes. His real-life legacy as Emperor of Shu looms over the narrative.
Guan Yu, the righteous loyal warrior, kills Xuchang, instantly iconic.
Embodiment of loyalty and martial virtue, unwavering.
And Zhang Fei, hot-headed, fiercely loyal, incredible fighter, quick to anger like with Dong Zhuo, but totally devoted to his brothers.
Exactly, a force of nature on the battlefield. So you see the motivations shaping up. The brothers driven by their oath and loyalty to the Han ideal, Dong Zhuo by pure tyranny, Yuan Shao by aristocratic leadership turning into regional power, Cao Cao by cunning strategy and ambition, Lu Bu by martial pride and susceptibility to manipulation.
These are the archetypes, the different reactions to the collapse of order.
Absolutely. Principled loyalty, naked ambition, established power adapting, strategic opportunism, and raw military force for hire. Their clashes define this era.
And the first big clash resolved is Dong Zhuo's tyranny. It ends with that plot. Lu Bu kills him.
Wang Yun's plan succeeds. He expertly plays on Dong Zhuo's desires and Lu Bu's pride and rage over Diao Chan. He pushes Lu Bu relentlessly. He treats you like dirt.
Lu Bu finally snaps.
"I'll kill the wretch, I swear, before heaven and earth." And he follows through. Wang Yun is praised by the historian in the text for his cunning plot, bringing the tyrant down. It seems like a victory, right? Problem solved.
You'd think, remove the tyrant, restore order. But not so simple.
Rarely is. Removing the common enemy often just unleashes more chaos. The source says Dong Zhuo's former commanders, Li Zhu and Guesi, don't just surrender. They lead Dong Zhuo's remaining army back into the capital.
And Wang Yun can't stop them.
No, they're given free license to loot and destroy. The capital descends into even worse anarchy. These guys even think about taking over themselves. Why don't we get rid of the emperor and so create our own dynasty?
So killing Dong Zhuo didn't fix anything. It just created a power vacuum filled by his even less principled underlings.
Pretty much. Lu Bu, the assassin, can't defeat them and is forced to flee, becoming a wanderer. And with Dong Zhuo gone, the warlord coalition has no reason to stick together. It completely falls apart.
And the empire just shatters.
Completely. That later poem snippet lists them all. The Sun family rising in the east, Yuan Shao consolidating the north, Liu Yan in the west, Liu Biao down south, various others in different regions, Ma Teng, Gongsun Zan, and Cao Cao. Crucially, noted as becoming the greatest of all in the north, attracting talent, building real power.
So Dong Zhuo's fall doesn't lead to restoration, it leads to fragmentation, warlords carving up the empire.
That's the immediate result. The fight shifts from us versus the tyrant to everyone versus everyone else. They all start building their own skates, fighting each other for land and power, even if some pay lip service to the powerless Han Emperor. Cao Cao emerges as the dominant force in the north, setting the stage for the next phase.
Okay, so that's the whirlwind beginning. We've got the Han dynasty rotting from the inside, the Yellow Turban Rebellion exploding outwards, forcing local powers to rise, the heroes forging their bond in the chaos, the tyrant Dong Zhuo seizing power only to be brought down by betrayal, and his fall leading not to peace, but to the empire completely fracturing into warring states.
It's the essential origin story of the Three Kingdoms. You see the systemic failure of a Han, but also how individual ambition, Dong Zhuo's tyranny, Yanzhou's pride, Cao Cao's cunning, even the brothers' idealism drives events. It explains why the next phase is this multi-sided struggle among numerous contenders, not just a simple fight against one bad guy.
And those themes just echo down the centuries, don't they? Loyalty, betrayal, ambition, survival. What makes power legitimate when everything's falling apart?
Absolutely. They speak to really fundamental things about power, chaos, and human nature. That's why the story remains so compelling.
Thinking about that total fragmentation, all those warlords popping up everywhere, it really makes you wonder. The source mentions that later Kongming says 3 kingdoms now exist, and that Liu Bei started with nothing, but fate decreed otherwise. With so many powerful figures initially, Cao Cao, Yuan Shao, Sun Jian, Liu Biao, all these guys, was it inevitable that it would boil down to just 3 main powers in the end? Or was it really down to the specific choices, the alliances, the betrayals, the moments of genius or luck, and maybe that fate that shaped the outcome and narrowed the field so drastically over those decades of war?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How much is inevitable historical force? How much is individual action and chance? The novel wrestles with that constantly.
Definitely something to chew on. Well, thank you for guiding us through these chaotic beginnings, these seeds of chaos.
My pleasure. It's an incredible story to unpack.